Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight we're diving deep into the mysterious and eerie world of California, a state known for its sun and surf. But beneath the golden skies lies an undercurrent of chilling stories that will leave you questioning what lurks in the shadows. From haunted mansions to long-forgotten dark places, get ready for 5 of the most disturbing true California horror stories that will send chills down your spine. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing, and by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. You grow up hearing certain places are cursed, but you never believe it. There's a difference between weird and wrong, and Kayla Reyes always thought Turnbull Canyon was just weird. Like that neighbor who never mowed their lawn and smiled too wide. A little off, but not dangerous. Everyone knew the stories. Cults in the 1930s, children disappearing in the 50s, a girl jumping from a cliff in the 80s after hearing the whispers. Urban legends, campfire garbage. Even the older Mexican women in Whittier, women like Kayla's abuela, warned about it. No vayas allí, they'd say, voice low, like the canyon might overhear. Hay cosas que no son de este mundo. Kayla used to roll her eyes, but that was before Eli died. After that, the world changed, permanently. Like someone reached inside and pulled all the light out of things. It was Jamie's idea. It always was. They were sitting in Sean's car, parked in the corner of a Wendy's lot, smoking some garbage weed, and drinking whatever they could find in Jamie's stepdad's liquor cabinet. Lexi was on her 3rd vape flavor. Kayla had her knees pulled up to her chest. That's when Jamie said it. "Let's hike Turnbull." Sean laughed. Lexi groaned. Kayla didn't react. "No, for real," Jamie said, eyes a little too wild. "Full moon, midnight. Let's see if it's as haunted as everyone says." Sean smirked. "What, hoping to get possessed?" "I don't know. Might be nice to feel something." Everyone laughed, except Kayla. She was still staring out the window. The Wendy's sign was flickering like it had a secret. 10 minutes later, they were driving toward the canyon. There's a silence in Turnbull Canyon that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's not the quiet of night or the hush of a forest. It's a watching silence. A waiting one. At the rusted trailhead, their laughter stopped. No one said it, but they all felt it, like stepping into a house that still remembered the last person who screamed inside it. "I don't like this," Lexi said, holding her hoodie tighter. "It feels off." "Don't be a baby," Jamie grinned. "It's just wind." But the wind didn't sound like wind, not really. It moved against them, curled around their necks like cold fingers. Sean clicked on his flashlight. "Let's go before someone chickens out." They walked. The trail narrowed as it twisted upward. Trees leaned in close. Kayla's boots crunched over something that cracked, sharp and hollow. She didn't look down. About a mile in, something changed. The moon dimmed, though there were no clouds. The wind stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. And then Jamie pointed. "Yo, what the hell is that?" Off the trail, maybe 30 yards through the brush, a pale, flickering light moved between the trees. Not like a flashlight, more like an old lantern, soft and sickly yellow, swaying back and forth, even though there was no breeze. "Is there a house out here?" Lexi asked. "No," Sean said. "Just hills and bones." Kayla stared at the light. It made her stomach turn, like watching a flame underwater. "I think it's calling us," Jamie said, stepping off the path. "Jamie, don't..." But he was already moving toward it. Lexi followed, reluctant. Sean looked at Kayla, shrugged, and went after them. Kayla didn't move. That's when the whispering started. Not one voice, many, layered like wet leaves, humming through the trees. At first it sounded like wind through dry grass, soft, rhythmic. But then it shaped itself into words, foreign, ancient. And then one of the voices broke away from the rest and said her name. "Kayla." She froze. It was soft, familiar, warm. "Kayla, come here." It was Eli's voice, her dead brother's voice. "Please." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Her knees shook. She tried to take a step back, but her legs didn't listen. "I need you." It wasn't possible. Eli had died 2 years ago on a rainy highway, windshield glass like teeth. Neck snapped so fast the coroner said he didn't feel a thing. And yet, there he was, his voice drifting through the trees like fog. "I'm cold." She turned. The light was closer now, and she was alone. She screamed for Jamie, for Lexi, for Sean. No reply. Then Jamie's voice echoed through the trees, ragged, panicked. "It's not real, it's not real." Then silence. Then Lexi, crying, screaming a name Kayla didn't recognize. "Mom? No, no, get away from me." Then silence. Then nothing. Kayla ran. The trail was gone, replaced with brush, bramble, things that pulled at her ankles and whispered her worst memories into her ears. She tripped over something hard and dry, saw a white bone in the moonlight, sockets empty. Something moved behind her. She didn't look. The air grew thick, like syrup, like mud. Breathing hurt. Thinking hurt more. She ran until the light was behind her, until the voices turned to static, until her body gave up and the trees parted. She stumbled out near the old road, feet bare, lips cracked, face scratched raw. She screamed once before collapsing. The police found nothing. They searched the canyon for days. Drones, dogs, helicopters. No sign of Jamie, or Lexi, or Sean. Their phones last pinged at 12:44 a.m. near the old power station ruins. Then, nothing, like they were erased. Kayla told the truth, at least her truth. They called it trauma. Said she was in shock, inventing stories to cope with survivors' guilt. No one believed her. But late at night, in the psych ward where they kept her for 72 hours, she'd lie awake and hear his voice. Eli's, humming lullabies they used to sing in the back seat of her mom's car. The canyon had taken something from her, but it had also left something behind. A month later, another group went missing. 2 hikers. A couple from Riverside. Found their car. Never found them. The lights come and go. Sometimes, if you're driving Turnbull at night, you'll see it. A pale lantern glow, bobbing in the dark. Moving against the wind. Rick Midnight Malone was a man who had been chasing ghosts for years. His career at KZQR, the only AM radio station in Modesto, had fizzled out years ago. Back in the 80s, he was the voice that rattled the airwaves at night. The voice you heard while driving home after too many drinks, or before the weight of sleep settled on your eyelids. People knew his name, even if they didn't like it. Midnight Malone. He had the voice, the charm, and a knack for getting people's attention. But now in the fall of 1997, he was nothing more than a relic, a ghost of a time long gone, sitting in a dusty radio studio on the edge of town, hoping for a miracle that never came. The station itself was dying. The building, a 2-story hulk of brick and glass, was falling apart. The roof leaked. The equipment sputtered. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee, cigarette smoke, and mold. The only things still alive in KZQR were the rusting transmitters and the creaky old speakers. And Rick. Rick sat alone in the control room, staring at the flickering green lights of the equipment in front of him, the hum of the dead station filling the empty spaces. It was Halloween night, but Rick hadn't bothered to put on a costume. He didn't care about the holiday anymore. He hadn't cared about much for the last few years. Not since his wife left, not since his son stopped calling, not since the station started slipping away. Tonight, all he had was a 6-pack of cheap beer, the hum of the transmitter, and a strange old reel-to-reel tape that had appeared on his desk that morning with a single note attached, "Do not air." Rick wasn't a superstitious man, but that note nagged at him. It was typed, the ink smudged in places, like it had been handled too many times. He didn't know who'd left it. The only other person in the building was Cheryl, the receptionist, and she'd already left for the night. But the tape, it felt like it was meant for him. Like someone had planned this moment long before he ever touched it. "Hell with it," he muttered, cracking open another beer. What's the worst that could happen? It was 11:52 p.m. when Rick pushed the tape into the machine. He turned the volume up just a little, just enough to hear the faint buzz of static. He knew this wasn't the kind of tape that should be played. He'd been around long enough to recognize the quality of a recording, the hiss, the distortion. But something about the tape pulled at him. He needed to know what was on it. He pressed the button. The broadcast began with a deep, rumbling hum that rattled the speakers. It wasn't a sound you'd find in any radio station's playlist. It was unnatural, thick, and low, like a vibration crawling up from the earth itself. Rick rubbed his eyes, taking a long drink from his beer. His fingers twitched over the fader, but he didn't touch it. The hum grew louder. The dogs in the neighborhood began to howl. At first it was just one dog, then another, then a chorus of them, barking and yelping in terror. Rick's skin prickled. He leaned closer to the speakers, trying to make out the noise beneath the hum. Then the voice. It was low, sexless. A slithering thing that seemed to be speaking backwards, each syllable twisted and foreign. Rick frowned. What the hell? It sounded like someone reciting names, but the names weren't any names Rick knew. No, these were names from somewhere else, from another world. Names of the dead. Then it started naming people Rick knew. Robert Porter, the voice rasped. Tommy Hall. Rick's heart stopped. Those were the names of men who had died in Modesto in the past few years. Natural causes, accidents, things that weren't unusual in a town like this. But the next name made his stomach turn. Rick Malone. He slammed his hand onto the fader, cutting the broadcast. The hum stopped. The room was silent save for the ragged sound of Rick's breathing. His skin felt cold, his heart racing. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He stared at the reel-to-reel, his mind scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. How the hell did it know his name? But then, as if to answer him, the voice came again, quieter this time, but unmistakable. You will join them. Rick froze. His fingers hovered over the equipment, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The voice was coming from the speakers, but it wasn't from the tape. It was in the room. Join who? Rick whispered. The lights flickered. The static returned. The broadcast went dead at exactly 3:13 a.m. It wasn't the sound of the equipment shutting down. It wasn't the click of a malfunctioning switch. No, it was like the world itself had decided to take a breath and hold it. There was nothing. For a long moment, Rick sat there, staring at the empty reels, The dead microphone, the still equipment. He felt dizzy, nauseous. The hum of the air conditioning, the ticking of the clock on the wall, seemed unbearably loud. He could hear the wind rattling the windows, the occasional rattle of the old building settling into its bones. And then, the smell. It hit Rick like a punch in the gut, a sickening acrid odor of ozone and rot, something that didn't belong in a radio station. It smelled like something decayed, something ancient, something that had been left behind too long. Rick staggered to his feet, but before he could move, he collapsed. When the police arrived at KZQR, they found Rick slumped over the control board, his face a mask of agony. His eyes had melted into his cheeks, the skin gone soft and slick, as though the moisture had been sucked out of him. There was no sign of a struggle. No one had broken in. No one had touched the equipment. The room smelled like something had died in it, the faint traces of ozone still lingering in the air. The tape was still playing, its hum filling the dead air, though the station was long off the airwaves. Rick Malone was dead. To this day, no one knows where the tape came from. Some say it was a prank. Others whisper that it was the work of something darker, something that had been waiting for Rick Malone, for KZQR, for the night the air would be right for its return. But there are still rumors. Some truckers who drive Highway 99 late at night swear they've heard the broadcast. They don't know why, but between 2 and 3 a.m., if they tune their radios just right, they can hear fragments of Rick's last broadcast. Broken whispers that don't make sense, voices that seem to reach out from the static, saying things like, "Help me. You're next. Join us." No one can explain it. No one wants to. Some things are better left forgotten. But if you drive that stretch of Highway 99, between 2 and 3 a.m., don't be surprised if your radio crackles to life. If the static seems to whisper your name, beckoning you into the dark. Marcus Bell wasn't the kind of man who took no for an answer. The kind of photographer who chased after myths with the same intensity as he did wildlife and desert landscapes. Marcus believed in the story more than the destination. He lived for the chase, finding the hidden, the secret, the things people whispered about at campfires, over beers, and behind closed doors. In 2016, Marcus set his sights on the Mojave Desert, Joshua Tree in particular. There was something about the place, the twisted trees, the barren expanse of sand, the silence that hung in the air like a secret. He had heard about the ley lines, ancient paths of power that supposedly crisscrossed the earth, and he wanted to capture them on film. He wanted to show people the eerie beauty of it all, the places where the world's energy thrummed just below the surface, where reality felt stretched. Most people didn't know about the old stories, the ones that talked about the spirits and ancient forces that haunted the desert, but Marcus wasn't like most people. He didn't just want to shoot the landscape. He wanted to catch whatever might be there, lurking between the rocks and the cacti. The kind of thing that could never be explained away by science or reason. When he left for Joshua Tree, it was for a story that might make his career. A breakthrough. He promised his editor he'd be back in 2 weeks, but he didn't come back. It was 2 months before Marcus's body was found. The desert had swallowed him whole, or at least it seemed to have. His car was found abandoned near a trailhead. His backpack, empty but for some half-eaten trail mix, was nearby. The rangers combed the area, found nothing but dust and emptiness. They were ready to call it another tragic disappearance. Just another soul lost to the desert's quiet hunger. But then the camera turned up. A local hiker had found it beneath a cairn, a pile of stacked rocks that seemed like an innocent enough marker in the vast wilderness. The hiker had almost passed it by, but something about the way the rocks were arranged made him stop, a nagging feeling crawling up his spine. The camera was buried beneath it. A small Canon DSLR, scratched, battered, but still intact. There was a single memory card inside. The police were the first to get their hands on the photos. They saw the usual stuff at first: sweeping landscapes of the Mojave Desert, close-ups of the twisted Joshua trees, distant mountain ridges. Nothing too out of the ordinary. But the farther they scrolled through, the more unsettled they became. The photos were still beautiful, yes, but there was something wrong about them. Something that couldn't be explained. The first image that seemed odd was one of a lone Joshua tree in the distance, lit by the soft light of dawn. But in the background, far too far to be an artifact, there was a tall, dark figure standing between two distant trees, its shape impossibly stretched, thin and long-limbed. At first they thought it was a trick of the light. Maybe some rock formation, the odd way a shadow had fallen. But the next photo, taken a few frames later, was clearer. The figure hadn't moved. It hadn't changed. Its outline was sharp against the fading light, but its features were unclear, as if it had been blurred by some invisible force. The antlers stretching from its head looked like branches burned black by fire, twisted and unnatural. As the photos continued, the figure appeared in frame after frame, always in the distance, always the same size no matter how Marcus moved his camera. Closer and closer it came, with every shot, as if it were following him. But it never changed in size, never loomed any closer than it already was. It wasn't supposed to be real. The last photo on the card was a blur. The lens was half obscured by a hand, a blurry figure reaching toward the camera, its fingers cracked and deformed, skin pulling apart, leaking sand. In the corner of the photo, just on the edge of the frame, something black and tall loomed. The figure's eyes weren't visible, but there was a sense that it was staring straight at the camera, straight at Marcus. The last image was followed by static, and then silence. The police tried to make sense of it. They called it the work of some prankster. Maybe another photographer, someone who'd found Marcus's equipment and decided to finish what he'd started. But that didn't explain the photos. The shape in the background. The unnatural stillness of the figure. The photographs were sent to experts, to paranormal investigators, to those who dealt with the unknown. No one could explain the figure in the photos. Some said it was a shadow, a trick of light and perspective. But there was always a lingering doubt. In the weeks that followed, a strange thing began to happen. Campers who visited Joshua Tree started to report seeing something between the trees. Something tall, thin, standing still, almost like it was waiting. Some said it was the same figure from Marcus's photos. Others described it as something different, a man perhaps, but stretched and distorted like an old rotting tree. And always its antlers. The sightings started to multiply. A hiker in the southern part of the park described a figure standing just outside his campfire's light, watching him from between the Joshua trees. A family reported hearing footsteps in the sand late at night, the sound of something heavy moving slowly around their campsite. A couple even claimed to have seen it in the distance while driving toward the park, tall and black against the setting sun, standing on a rise of land as if it had been waiting for them. The legend of Marcus Bell grew. Some called it the devil at Joshua Tree, others the Watcher. But no one could explain it. Now, every year, on the anniversary of Marcus's disappearance, there are whispers among the hikers, the campers, the wanderers who brave the desert night. The stories are always the same. A figure, a tall dark thing, standing between the Joshua trees, watching. And sometimes if you're out there, just the right place, just the right time, you might hear it too. A whisper on the wind, a crackling sound that isn't just the dry desert air, something moving through the static. A sound like dry sand slipping through cracked fingers. The last photo on Marcus's memory card wasn't the last of its kind. Campers who wander too far into the park, who venture off the trail or into the quiet spaces, sometimes report seeing it. The Watcher, the devil at Joshua Tree, waiting, watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, you'll hear a voice, cold and dry as the sand itself, whispering your name. You'll know then that it's too late to leave. In the 1960s, 1336 Hollydale Drive wasn't much more than a tired old craftsman house, sitting among the streets of south-central Los Angeles. To those passing by, it was just another home in a modest neighborhood. Faded, a little weather-worn, like every other house on the block. But when the Ramirez family moved in, something began to change. Something insidious that would creep through the walls, slip into the floors, and eventually claim every piece of the house. Carlos Ramirez, a young father just starting out, had been looking for a place to raise his family. His wife, Maria, was pregnant with their second child, and the house seemed like the perfect fit. It was big enough for a growing family, and it sat in an up-and-coming neighborhood that seemed just right for a man with big dreams. They didn't notice it at first, the way the house felt different. They were too busy settling in, too focused on the mundane things, unpacking boxes, setting up the crib, getting groceries. But the cracks started to show almost immediately. At first, it was just little things. The doors that didn't close properly. The strange drafts in rooms with no windows. A sudden cold spot in the kitchen where no draft should be. It wasn't much, just enough to make Carlos scratch his head and Maria mention it once or twice, but they brushed it off as quirks of an old house. Then one night, their baby Sophia spoke. At 8 months old, Sophia shouldn't have been speaking at all, much less speaking in full sentences. But there she was, sitting in her crib, looking up at her mother with wide, innocent eyes and saying, "Mommy, it's time to go home." Maria froze, heart racing. "What did you say, sweetie?" she whispered, unsure if she had heard it right. Sophia just smiled, a little too widely, and said it again, "It's time to go home." But there was something wrong about the way she said it. The voice was too clear, too adult. It chilled Maria's bones. She tried to laugh it off, to convince herself it was just a fluke, some odd noise from Sophia's toys or the wind outside. But it stayed with her. The words echoed in her mind, and over the next few days, she began to notice other things. The baby's eyes, they seemed too knowing, too aware for a child so young. And Sophia's smile, that unnerving, too wide grin that never quite seemed to reach her eyes. It lingered in Maria's thoughts. The odd occurrences were not confined to the Ramirez family. The neighbors noticed too. At first it was just gossip, the kind of chatter that drifts through a neighborhood, the kind that gets passed from one set of lips to another. But then it was more than just words. They saw things. The old Mrs. Allen, who lived next door, claimed to have seen something moving across the ceiling through an open window one afternoon. "It was crawling," she said, her voice trembling as she spoke to anyone who would listen. Long, boneless, and smiling. It didn't look like any human thing I've ever seen. The words spread quickly. People said they saw it too. A shadow in the corners of their eyes. A flicker of something crawling across the walls in the dead of night. But when they turned to look, nothing was there. Just the house. the house that always felt wrong. Some nights people heard the baby crying, but when they went to check, the house was eerily silent. Maria and Carlos's attempts to explain their child's strange behavior only earned them concerned glances from the neighbors, and eventually, Child Protective Services was called. Several times. But no one could prove anything. The house was, at first, still just a house. Strange, unsettling, but not yet dangerous. Then came the night when it all finally tipped over the edge. It was the kind of night when everything felt too quiet, when the stars hung low and heavy over the neighborhood. The air was thick with heat, though it was late in the evening. The kind of oppressive warmth that clings to your skin and makes it hard to breathe. At around 2 a.m., a blood-curdling scream shattered the peace of Hollydale Drive. It wasn't just one scream, it was a chorus of screams. Sharp, high-pitched, desperate, full of a terror that made your stomach twist. Neighbors stumbled out of their homes, some still in their nightclothes, some shaking with fear, others too terrified to move. When the police arrived, it was already too late. The Ramirez family was gone. Every single one of them. Gone without a trace. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No bodies. Just an empty house with a silence so deep it felt unnatural. Like the air had been sucked out of the place. And then there was the wall. It was the wall in the living room. A single message scrawled across it in deep gouges, as though the words had been etched into the drywall by fingernails. Many, many fingernails. Over and over. The message was simple but chilling. In the 1960s, 1336 Hollydale Drive wasn't much more than a tired old craftsman house, sitting among the streets of south-central Los Angeles. To those passing by, it was just another home in a modest neighborhood. Faded, a little weather-worn, like every other house on the block. But when the Ramirez family moved in, something began to change. Something insidious that would creep through the walls, slip into the floors, and eventually claim every piece of the house. Carlos Ramirez, a young father just starting out, had been looking for a place to raise his family. His wife, Maria, was pregnant with their second child, and the house seemed like the perfect fit. It was big enough for a growing family, and it sat in an up-and-coming neighborhood that seemed just right for a man with big dreams. They didn't notice it at first, the way the house felt different. They were too busy settling in, too focused on the mundane things, unpacking boxes, setting up the crib, getting groceries. But the cracks started to show almost immediately. At first, it was just little things. The doors that didn't close properly. The strange drafts in rooms with no windows. A sudden cold spot in the kitchen, where no draft should be. It wasn't much, just enough to make Carlos scratch his head, and Maria mention it once or twice, but they brushed it off as quirks of an old house. Then one night, their baby Sophia spoke. At 8 months old, Sophia shouldn't have been speaking at all, much less speaking in full sentences. But there she was, sitting in her crib, looking up at her mother with wide, innocent eyes and saying, "Mommy, it's time to go home." Maria froze, heart racing. "What did you say, sweetie?" she whispered, unsure if she had heard it right. Sophia just smiled, a little too widely, and said it again, "It's time to go home." But there was something wrong about the way she said it. The voice was too clear, too adult. It chilled Maria's bones. She tried to laugh it off, to convince herself it was just a fluke, some odd noise from Sophia's toys or the wind outside. But it stayed with her. The words echoed in her mind, and over the next few days, she began to notice other things. The baby's eyes, they seemed too knowing, too aware for a child so young. And Sophia's smile, that unnerving, too wide grin, that never quite seemed to reach her eyes? It lingered in Maria's thoughts. The odd occurrences were not confined to the Ramirez family. The neighbors noticed too. At first, it was just gossip, the kind of chatter that drifts through a neighborhood, the kind that gets passed from one set of lips to another. But then it was more than just words. They saw things. The old Mrs. Allen, who lived next door, claimed to have seen something moving across the ceiling through an open window one afternoon. It was crawling, she said, her voice trembling as she spoke to anyone who would listen. Long, boneless, and smiling. It didn't look like any human thing I've ever seen. The words spread quickly. People said they saw it too. A shadow in the corners of their eyes. A flicker of something crawling across the walls in the dead of night. But when they turned to look, nothing was there. Just the house. The house that always felt wrong. Some nights people heard the baby crying, but when they went to check, the house was eerily silent. Maria and Carlos's attempts to explain their child's strange behavior only earned them concerned glances from the neighbors, and eventually, Child Protective Services was called. Several times. But no one could prove anything. The house was, at first, still just a house. Strange, unsettling, but not yet dangerous. Then came the night when it all finally tipped over the edge. It was the kind of night when everything felt too quiet, when the stars hung low and heavy over the neighborhood. The air was thick with heat, though it was late in the evening. The kind of oppressive warmth that clings to your skin and makes it hard to breathe. At around 2 a.m., a blood-curdling scream shattered the peace of Hollydale Drive. It wasn't just one scream, it was a chorus of screams. Sharp, high-pitched, desperate, full of a terror that made your stomach twist. Neighbors stumbled out of their homes, some still in their nightclothes, some shaking with fear, others too terrified to move. When the police arrived, it was already too late. The Ramirez family was gone. Every single one of them. Gone without a trace. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No bodies. Just an empty house with a silence so deep it felt unnatural. Like the air had been sucked out of the place. And then there was the wall. It was the wall in the living room. A single message scrawled across it in deep gouges, as though the words had been etched into the drywall by fingernails. Many, many fingernails. Over and over. The message was simple but chilling. Donner Lake, nestled in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountains, is a place steeped in history. The kind of history that people tell in whispers, huddled around campfires, their voices dropping low as if the very air might carry their words to something listening beneath the waves. It's a lake known for its beauty, its serenity. But beneath that glassy surface, something stirs, a shadow that's lingered there for far longer than anyone cares to acknowledge. Everyone knows the tale of the Donner Party, of how pioneers perished in the snow while trying to cross the Sierra Nevada. But what most don't know, what they'd rather not know, is that something else stayed behind. Something not human. It's in the water, the locals say, in the depths. And if you're foolish enough to dive in, to disturb it, you might never come back. In 2009, Darren was a scuba instructor, a man in love with the quiet, almost sacred calm that came with exploring the underwater world. He was a regular in the waters of Donner Lake, always looking for something to bring back from the depths, whether it was a lost phone, a set of keys, or a bit of old junk. The lake was known for hiding things that had sunk over the years, lost in its chilly embrace. But on this day, Darren was after something different. A GoPro. A student had dropped it during a dive a few days earlier, and Darren, ever the professional, volunteered to go retrieve it. The sun had just begun to dip below the mountains, casting long shadows across the lake. There was something about the lake at dusk, an eerie calm that made the water feel more like a tomb than a body of life-sustaining liquid. But Darren wasn't afraid. He'd been diving in lakes like this his entire life. He strapped on his gear, double-checked everything, and slipped beneath the water with the skill of someone who belonged there. At first, everything was normal. The visibility was decent, the water cool and refreshing, the gentle sway of the branches below welcoming, if a little odd. But as he descended, the feeling of unease crept in. The lake, which should have been clear of trees at the bottom, had something there, something that shouldn't have been. Branches, tangled together, clung to the water's floor, as though the lake had been an underwater forest once. Only the trees had died and sank. And then Darren saw the GoPro. It was wedged in the roots of one of the sunken trees, the camera just staring up at him, its lens cracked and waterlogged. He reached for it, then froze. Something caught his attention. A shift in the water, a movement. It was subtle at first, like a shadow passing over the lakebed. But the shadow, it wasn't a fish. It wasn't a fallen log. It was something else. Something that shouldn't have been moving at all. Darren's heart began to race. He glanced around, but all he saw was the murky depths and the sunken trees. And then, there it was. A figure point pale, bloated. Its limbs stretched and unnaturally long. The skin was a deathly shade of white, the kind of pale that only comes from drowning. Waterlogged eyes stared into the darkness, its grin too wide, too stretched. And yet it didn't move. It floated, suspended in the water, its arms unnaturally still, as if it was waiting for something. For him. The camera caught Darren's reaction, his slow, deliberate turn toward the thing, his breath hitching as he stared directly at the lens. And then, in a whisper, he spoke, his voice barely audible over the sound of his bubbling regulator. He lives here now. Before Darren could move, the figure started to glide forward, unnaturally fast, its bloated form drifting toward him with an eerie, unnatural grace. No ripples, no disturbance in the water. Just the dark shadow advancing, faster and faster, as if pulled by some invisible force. The GoPro's lens blurred as Darren scrambled, but it was too late. The shadow eclipsed the frame, and the last thing captured was a burst of static and gurgling, a scream muffled by water. When Darren didn't resurface, search teams were dispatched. They scoured the lake, diving into its murky depths, hoping for some sign of the man. His gear, his tank, his fins, his diving mask was found tangled in the sunken branches of the lake, but there was no sign of Darren himself. No body, nothing. For days the search continued, but there was nothing to find. The GoPro was recovered later, floating to the surface, eerily bobbing in the water just outside the search area. The footage was intact, saved for the last few moments before it went dark. The search teams watched in silence as the footage played, their faces pale, the air in the room thick with unease. When Darren whispered those words, "He lives here now," they thought they understood. But it wasn't until they saw the figure, that bloated, waterlogged thing, that they realized what had happened. The man who had gone diving had not disappeared. He had been claimed by something that had lived in the water for far longer than any human should have dared to imagine. The locals didn't need the footage to know what had happened. They knew the story. They had known it for generations, long before the tragedy of Darren and the strange occurrences surrounding his disappearance. It was the Waterman. He had been there since the Donner Party, since those desperate souls had camped near the lake, freezing and starving. Some said it was one of them, the ones who hadn't made it, the ones whose bodies had sunk to the bottom of the lake and changed. Others said it was something older, a creature that lived in the depths long before the first human set foot in California. Whatever it was there, in the dark. And it didn't just take lives. It took memories. It took pieces of the soul. That was the real horror of the waterman. Those who touched him, who came too close, forgot who they were. They'd wander aimless, lost in their own skin. They'd hear the lake calling to them, pulling them back as though they had never left. And worst of all, those who went in never came back alone. Now, when the sun dips behind the mountains and the sky grows dark, the locals know better than to swim in Donner Lake. The waterman doesn't like the light, they say. He thrives in the dark, where no one can see him coming. And if you feel a cold hand brush against your leg in the water, if you hear the sound of a distant whisper, one you can't quite make out, but you know it's calling your name, do not look. Do not turn toward the shadow that waits beneath the surface. Because if you do, you may not remember who you were when you resurface. And if you forget, the waterman will remember you